Hello and welcome to Ventures and Visionaries, Episode 9, Decoding Future-Proof Leadership. I'm your host, Mordy Hackel. I'm an entrepreneur, business founder, strategic consultant, people developer, and problem solver. This podcast is about people, entrepreneurship, business, and innovation. How do these different areas contrast, complement? How do we create leverage and multiplication? The podcast is also sponsored by KJ Technology, a strategic IT and cybersecurity advisory and services company. Today, my guest is Kevin Goldstein. Kevin is an ex-Wall Street executive turned entrepreneur. He founded 2 startups and helped 4 companies successfully exit. He has a broad and deep expertise in fintech, blockchain, digital and crypto assets, as well as alternative and traditional asset management, insurance, and cybersecurity. He's an advisor to the C-suite of many blockchain, digital, and crypto asset related companies, including banks, lending, trading, asset management, SPACs, venture capital, and so on. I'm so excited to have Kevin here. Kevin is not just a cybersecurity expert in technology, but he also holds an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management, is on the advisory board of the Kellogg Finance Network. Kevin, welcome. How are you doing today?
Mordy, thank you. Thank you for having me. Good day, and excited and delighted to join you for our conversation.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. I know we're not particularly far apart from each other, you being in Jersey and me being in New York. And I guess today we do have an absolutely gorgeous day outside. So thankful for that.
Indeed, and not quite as hot and humid as it's been of late. And Princeton is lovely this day, and so not too far from New York. But all good. Back to you. How would you like to kick things off?
Kevin, thank you. So firstly, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, because firstly, it sounds fascinating. You've done finance, you've done technology, you've done crypto assets, you have some backgrounds in probably things that we're not even talking about. And because the podcast is a little bit about how do we help people learn from the experience of the people who've done it, I'd like to learn a little bit about both how you got to where you got to and your journey.
Sure. Thank you. I think my journey is one that is indicative of a person who never figured out what he wanted to do when he grew up. And I got comfortable with that a long time ago.
Good for you.
And certainly my journey from after graduating Bowdoin College, I went into the hospitality industry, which most people don't know. Worked for the largest hotel catering leisure company in the world. And then I worked in the corporate insurance world while I got my MBA from Kellogg, which you noted, at night, because I didn't want to go back full time. And then I worked on Wall Street on a trading floor in credit and derivatives for most of the 90s. And then I stepped away and I started working on a lot of startups, helping people build companies, started building my own in fintech, software, some hardware side. Got deeply involved in cyber, which you referenced, because obviously that became more and more critical, especially in the regulated financial arena where I was playing. And then about 7.5 years ago, I followed my wife down the crypto, if you will, black hole, or whatever we want to call it, rabbit hole. And we've had our own advisory business ever since. In this global ecosystem, however nascent, however volatile, in what I call the blockchain digital crypto ecosystem. And it's been fascinating, a lot of different experiences, and we continue to pursue it as our full-time effort. And we'll get into some of it, I'm sure, in our conversation. But it's all been a path that I think, for me professionally, where it's never been about the destination. I didn't, obviously, as I acknowledged to you, I didn't know what the destination was. I didn't know what I was actually working towards. And I think that's a really important lesson that I try to instill upon younger people who I think are in a big rush in their 20s to figure it out and get to where they want to get to. And instead of embracing the journey and allowing the destination to come to them and make it happen, And, I'll reference something that my mother had in the house growing up, a scroll. And I remind myself of it every now and then, and I try to share it with others that the scroll said that life is a mystery to be lived and not a problem to be solved.
Ooh, wow. Oh, that is fantastic. Wow.
It's something that definitely has always resonated with me.
Huh.
And, in everything I've done personally and professionally, I've tried to embrace the journey
And
and let the destination come if through hard work, through effort, good fortune, all these things that develop over time. But that was very much something that resonated with me when I was very young.
my business partner and I have been talking for years, particularly during times of adversity, and we often remind each other that life happens for us and not to us. And that sounds very much aligned with what you're saying.
It is. And I think it's really difficult the younger you are, because you have less experience, to embrace the uncertainty, to embrace the adventure that I call life. And my professional career is never one that I could have forecasted. I had a liberal arts degree from Bowdoin College, and I was going to go in whatever direction life took me and that which I had interest. But I think the overriding theme for me was always curiosity and learning and not being afraid to challenge myself. And I think very importantly, I was comfortable with a certain element of risk, which means I've been comfortable along the way being out of my comfort zone. And I think that's something that probably is more my DNA than my, combined with, nature and nurture and some of the nurture. But I think these are things that are really have helped me navigate my professional career, let alone my personal life.
And I know that you've just mentioned that you think that this might be just part of who you are, but there had to have been a couple of lessons where ultimately you realized that the path that you were brought to was better than anything that you could have forecast yourself.
Right.
And how would you recommend for young people who are starting out their career to learn to trust life as opposed to try and fight tooth and nail?
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to is hard work is essential, and I don't think it ever becomes less essential. And I remember my father saying to me, he's a retired cardiologist, and he said in his 50s he was working as hard as he was in his 20s and 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought, maybe you think when you're in your 20s and 30s you'll be able to work less. No, not in reality. Not if you want to be the best at what you do. You continue to work 24/7, and maybe you work smarter. Hopefully, you work more efficiently, and hopefully, yeah, you're able to deliver in less time what you used to take more time. For young people, I've alluded to it. My concern is their rush, and we all felt that, um, and trusting sort of the process, and trusting in that if you do the right things, and if you've been fortunate to be instilled with the right values and I'll say principles and morals about how to conduct yourself in business or life, how to treat people, particularly early on in building relationships where you never know, as I've learned, where they'll come back around to help you 10, 20 years later, and I allude to that. But I think it's if you can find a certain inner strength or confidence, particularly to embrace the unknown, which is so disconcerting to many,
Yeah.
that things will work out. I'm a bit of a fatalist. I think they work out for the best. Maybe they work out for a reason. But it's something where you have to find the belief, and I think you've part of finding the belief through experience, through your own trial and error, through your own successes and adversity, and I think you have to be willing to make mistakes. I certainly have made God knows how many,
Yeah.
but I was never afraid to make them. I was simply trying to minimize the magnitude of them, learn from them, but accept mistakes. Accept you're human. You're inherently a mistake-ridden species, is who we are, and so. And I think also something I try to share with young people is when they come out of college or they're starting a new job, it's about enabling others' success initially, right? And I like to say to people, if you help others achieve their objectives or goals, if you're not careful, you might achieve yours.
Mm-hmm.
And don't look at things just from the standpoint of, okay, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this situation? That to me is not the way to approach it. I also sometimes I say to people that I feel like I was raised at a little different time. Not that I'm that old, but I feel like I was raised at a time when modesty was a virtue. And if something nice was said about you, it wasn't by you. And I think the way technology has evolved and our society is involved, we, to some extent, I don't think it's all positive. We champion those who champion themselves, perhaps too much.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it is how do you maintain being humble and hungry and hardworking? And I've always felt that a lot of my success, to the extent I've had success, or certainly in others I've observed, it's not what you do necessarily 9 to 5, but what are you doing from 5 p.m. to 9 a.m. every day or on the weekends that differentiates. Because I have always assumed in the jobs I've had that most people could do them. The question is, how do you do it better than most? And I still think that comes back to application, as I call it, which is hard work and putting in the time and continuing to work at your craft, no matter what you do.
Yeah, the part that you said that resonated with me most was the giving and the thinking of others first, and then ultimately, you can call it karma, the universe, or the golden rule, or every religion and wisdom book of any kind across the globe pretty much says the same thing, that if you invest in people and you give first, then what goes around will come around. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I'm also interested in thinking and in hearing your opinion about the hard work portion, right? Because obviously contributing and making other people look good, as you said, is incredibly powerful technique, if you will, as well, just in a life approach to doing the right thing. But, you spoke a little bit about this in terms of the above and beyond on the hard work side. And today we speak a lot about work-life balance. So how do you think a young person, maybe even somebody who's starting a family, how should they think about both being able to contribute 110% at work while contributing 110% at home or in whatever else is going on in their lives?
And that's the $64,000 question, as we used to say, right? How do you find that life-work balance, if there is such a thing?
Yeah.
And I think it's very individual, and I think it's very unique to an individual and their family. And how do they find, their path forward? Because, right, family, friends are essential. And you're starting with your health and then your family and your friends and your work. And I know that I've never lived to work. I work to live. That said, I think I've worked very hard, and I think I've worked 24/7 relative to the different fields I was in and trying to learn and spend the time and the effort. And so obviously in current times, fast forward to where we are now, where we have hybrid work environments. You and I are having this conversation via video where go back 10 years, it wouldn't even probably been a thought for you to launch successfully your own program. And so, with technology evolving, it can be an efficient enhancer. It can improve your efficiency. It can enable you to do things you couldn't do before. But then how do you strike the balance between it being over relied on or a crutch or et cetera? And so I think for young folks, they've just got to figure out on their own, with hopefully talking to others, what is the right balance between working in the office, working at home, working using different technologies. And if I have a worry that I've voiced since for the past 4 years, is I felt right from the get-go there was going to be a significant implication of people not being around each other in an office. and particularly for the young people. So when we talk about the young people, I know how much I benefited by simply being present and being able to watch more senior people and being able to listen to them.
Yeah.
Being there where maybe they said to me, "Hey, Kevin, come on, we're going for a drink. We're going for lunch. Just come." And I would just be a fly on the wall, and I would listen and I would learn. And or we used to say, water cooler conversation. You have the serendipitous, you're both going for a cup of coffee in the cafeteria, et cetera, and it leads to a conversation and you learn things or you get invited to something. So there's no substitute in my mind for being present around, particularly if you're young, around more senior people. And I benefited enormously. So that was immediately what I found out. And then when I talked to some of my friends who are in senior positions in large companies, they were very clear about saying, for the young people, if they came in the office, it was noted if they worked from home instead. And when it comes to promotions, when it comes to if we have to do a RIF, we have to reduce our force, there are implications. So there's an element of still voting present. And I think you're starting to see over the last few years, companies bring their employees back in the office, if not 5 days a week, at least 3 or 4. So I think each company is different. Each company has its own culture. But then each individual has to make a judgment between that work-life combo and sort of not necessarily expect that they're going to be having dinner with their family every night.
Yeah.
Don't expect that they're always going to be around on the weekends if they have to travel for work. My father would have his medical office hours during the day. He would try to come home and have dinner with my sisters, my mother and I, and then he would go into the hospital at night to see patients. So that's how he struck the balance back in the day. But then he was working on the weekends. And again, he was my example of work ethic,
Right.
an example of what you value. So there is no formula. There's no reading in a book. I think the way to do a lot of things in life, and I just think you live it, you learn, you surround yourself with the best people, try to get the right advice. If you're fortunate, you have a good mentor when you're younger, or you have some friends or family that have been in business and can give you the right guidance.
Yeah. And these are all great points, and I love it. And maybe we can pivot right now, at least from my observation. I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well. It seems like the economy, at least as far as tech companies are concerned, is shedding quite a bit of labor. Now, you can attribute that to an anticipation of AI. You can anticipate that. You can attribute that to companies trying to improve the way their bottom line works, particularly during the times when inflation is high and so on. I'm not an economist on that level, nor am I trying to figure out why this is happening. It's just anecdotally what I'm observing. So if you were giving advice to somebody who's probably middle of their career and is now looking to shift and start to think about where would there be opportunities that could be leveraged, whether they would be in technology or management or so on, where are you seeing the opportunities for people to find new opportunities for themselves?
Right. I think there's at least a couple points that come to mind. One, the group that you're identifying, sort of, let's say people in their 30s and 40s, we'll call it middle management. In my career, over 40 years, they're the most at-risk group. So I think you're identifying, to me, the most at-risk group. And one of the challenges that people have, and I used to say, especially in large companies, is if you're not working hard to take the work off of your manager's desk, then you're at risk. Because the person who works for you, if they're doing that, they're going to do more and more of your job. And if you're not doing more and more of your boss's job, guess who's going to be reduced in force?
Right.
And so that's where you can't sit back in your 30s and 40s and coast, because you're in greater at risk. And then you layer in technology, which allows, I think, younger people to do even more of that much faster.
Mm-hmm.
And think about how AI is evolving so quickly across our society. And I think there is, to bring AI into the conversation, and not that I'm an expert in AI, but I'm a student of all of this. I'm a student of technology. And I will say at a broad level, and I built fintech companies and worked with a lot, created software solutions. I used to say to my technologists and developers, it's not about the technology. And I know you want to work with certain code, certain languages, et cetera. It's about what the technology enables. And so when I look at AI as just an evolution of technology, and we can talk about blockchain and what that means, et cetera, what it really is going to enable people to do is either become more efficient, and if they're able to use it to become more efficient, more productive, then I think their jobs are less at risk. If they don't figure that out and the AI advances start to do more and more of their job, obviously at a lower level, depending on where they are in the corporate hierarchy, then they will lose their job, because capitalism or business is ruthless in many ways, and costs are going to be reduced. And technology in many ways has reduced costs over the years, as well as increasing costs around compliance and many cybersecurity, as you referenced earlier. So the middle executive is the most at risk, always has been in my career. And so the question is and also then, are they willing to take chances? Are they willing to step away from their core comfort zone and maybe go with a new area of their company that's evolving, where they can bring their knowledge and experience and relationships to a new area of a company that may be evolving and growing, that cannot be replicated by those younger than them and is valued by those more senior, regardless of age. And I think being willing to take some risks, being willing to evolve, if they're able to step away from the company they're working for and join an earlier stage company, that could be a function of economics, could be a function of expenses, and they've got a family and a mortgage, school, whatever. But if you're not continuing to evolve, if you become stagnant, if you become complacent, I think you're increasingly at risk with the way that technology is evolving. So again, there's no book to read. There's no coach that's going to tell you exactly what to do. It's taking accountability and responsibility for your career and investing in yourself, what I call the personal franchise versus the corporate. And what has changed in my life is certainly we don't work at one company for 40 years, right? So I've often talked with people about investing in their personal franchise versus their corporate. And when you join a company, you're linking your personal and the corporate. When you step away, that's your personal. And what value are you bringing to a new situation? What is it you're going to offer to a different employer? Or if you're going to join something that's earlier stage, what are you bringing that's going to be of value to an earlier stage company to complement or supplement the others that are a part of it?
Yeah, and you've said some things that I truly believe in myself. Somebody who's been working in technology for 27, 28 years roughly, I would say that in my experience, every 18 months, there's a minor shift, and every 36 months, there's a generational shift. So in my tenure, I'm looking at KJ 13.0, and the latest evolution is, like you said, doing a podcast. So here we are having fun, and at the same time, being able to push outside of a comfort zone is a very wise and astute way of looking at it. And, maybe like we said at the beginning, also opening up to life's journey and where life can potentially present the opportunities, rather than saying, oh, no, I can't do that. Those are both interesting points. But since you did bring up, the idea of cryptocurrency and blockchain, and I think you have quite a bit of insight and exposure, maybe give us a little bit let's start maybe let's take a step back and speak a little bit for the people who may not know what that is. Let's give them a little bit of a background, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper.
Sure. The way I look at it, and I used to do a lot more educating about the ecosystem that my wife Coco and I work in, but it hasn't changed. I would say the same things today if I was talking to a student group or a business panel, or I've spoken to hundreds of executives at a time about blockchain. Because I was in a relatively early mover in 16, 17, when it was this crazy idea, what is this Bitcoin? And I can't tell you how many times I had friends of my genre or my similar age who were buying me coffee, breakfast, dinner, drinks, and saying, "What is blockchain 101? What is this Bitcoin thing? Um, who are these cyberpunks?" It was this fringe, crazy stuff that I had embraced, and by definition, I was seen as probably nutty, and probably still am. By and large, a lot of our society, depending on who they listen to and who they believe about what is happening. But the way that I the way that I embraced it was an understanding that blockchain is an evolution in database technology. That's all it is.
Uh-huh.
And what I've enjoyed about technology, and I can't code, but I've built fintech companies, and again, it comes back to how does technology enable a better experience, or heretofore, what does it enable that wasn't possible? So I look at this evolution in database technology as enabling experiences that heretofore weren't possible. And so there's a lot of different blockchain efforts underway. There are a lot of different protocols, as we call them, but through the cryptography, through the shared database, um, and then enabling of smart contracts, we'll say, and we're not going to get very technical in this conversation. Someone can always reach out to me afterwards so we can go technical to the extent that I can. But what you're enabling is heretofore wasn't possible. And I think there's some really good illustrations of that, which we can talk about. Then I look at crypto, or the assets on top of the blockchain that are linked to them, which by and large, in many situations, are essential to enable the evolution of that database or that specific blockchain. And I do believe we're working our way, and I have for years, towards a multiple blockchain world. And in all technology, there are trade-offs between scalability and security, and et cetera, et cetera.
It's a life thing, not a
And
technology
so
thing, but sure.
it's just what's normally evolving. And so if you look at historically, we have two operating platforms, right? Or, you have iOS, you have Android on phones, you have Windows and Mac. So I think we're going to have this evolving blockchain database enabled world. And then what excites my wife and I in our work with all the different players that we have worked with in the ecosystem, from governments to banks to VCs to early stage companies, is how do we help them create applications that are going to leverage this database technology to enable a different experience or a better experience, or trust in a way that can disintermediate some of the friction that goes on in the ecosystem with intermediaries who we call rent seekers historically. And they're just taking a piece, and they're not really adding value.
Mhm.
And, listen, in the 90s, I spent the decade on a trading floor, and a lot of my friends at Wall Street, traders, what are they offering society? They're just taking money. They're just taking, but a lot of people didn't understand the function of Wall Street, and to this day, in terms of its enabling our capitalist system
Sure.
and capital raising and allocation, et cetera. So with the evolution of blockchain, we're starting to see, and people are frustrated it's not happening faster, but we're starting to see use cases which are very meaningful.
Mhm.
And we're only going to see more and more. And I think the use of a stable coin is a great example.
Okay.
And I think part of the challenge for the US-centric market is being able to look at this evolution of technology um, from a non-US viewpoint.
Mhm.
Look at it from the standpoint of you're in South America, and when it comes to your local, your fiat currency being debased, could you possibly move your assets, your fiat, into something like a Bitcoin, or even better to me, a stable coin?
Yeah, those
So
issues
I
were
think
large in places like Zimbabwe a number of years back, and so on. Like those are fantastic
absolutely,
use
where
cases.
hyperinflation is devastating,
Yeah,
and the debasement and destruction of the local fiat is devastating to people.
yeah,
And so, there's a reason that there's more $100 US or Benjamins around the world than there are in the US, because the US dollar has been used in ways to protect, divest from local fiat, et cetera. So, to me, we have a whole ecosystem that's evolving in very exciting ways that's global. The regulation around it has been challenging. because you've got a lot of jurisdictions. We've moved a lot slower in the U.S. to regulate the infrastructure or stable coins or, what is a security and not a security.
Those are real issues. Yeah.
We move slower. I mean, these are issues of merit. We've moved slower than a lot of people in the ecosystem would like, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
And I'm encouraged by what's transpiring. And I do think that innovation is increasingly being embraced in this area in Washington by our elected officials and et cetera. So we're just scratching the surface still, albeit we've been very public in what we've been doing in this ecosystem for a dozen or more years, right? If you want to go back to the original Bitcoin white paper, it was '09. And there's a lot of different definitions or value propositions that are evolving. But to me, it's unquestionably the future. We call it Web3, more decentralized. I don't think there's anything that's really permissionless or trustless. I think it's minimizing trust to the extent we can get rid of intermediaries, to the extent that individuals can actually own their own data rather than having an intermediary make the money on our data. Can we truly enable you, me, and those who may be listening to us own their own data and monetize it themselves as opposed to someone else, right? As the old joke is, if you're not paying for a product, you're the product.
Of course.
So there's an ethos. But what is truly remarkable is it's happening in real time. It's happening very publicly because the crypto assets trade. And I've looked at most of them for the time that I've been in the ecosystem as really a sentiment index. How is that project doing? How are the developers doing? And not that our traditional equities aren't sentiment indexes, but there's a bit more clarity in terms of what they're supposed to represent in terms of future earnings. But I think my wife and I embraced an ecosystem that is just in the early days. It's global. It's never easy to find the good people in an ecosystem, but we've been able to find enough to work with, bring enough value to them, whether strategic or tactical, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just going to go on and on from here and enable hopefully better experiences and new experiences.
So, I mean, you spoke a little bit about the early days, and I think we started advising some cryptocurrency companies back in 12 and 13 as well. And in those days, we were doing some cybersecurity work, working with traders who were keeping wallets on their computers as opposed to, and that was really the wild, wild west of cybersecurity as far as this was concerned. And in those days, people didn't know what they didn't know, and hardening the protocols and developing the right kinds of ways to protect what was a very early stage industry and trying to figure out, well, is this an asset class? And if so, what do you do with it? And how do you build it? And do regular financial companies engage in the same way? Or, do you really need a separate trading firm? Do you really need a separate company that's going to create I'm going to use a term that you'll probably understand better than I do, the ETFs and so on. And all those things are fascinating to me for a number of reasons, because those, as you said, are applications on top of the blockchain. But that's the part that gets all the noise. And that's the part that the media speaks about. So I guess where I'm going with this is, if the blockchain is the database, and that is where truly the benefit to society could be, what are you seeing that is truly blowing your mind on that front? That is, as you said, something that couldn't be done before and is now, whether it's being done or not being done, but these are cool ideas that are being explored.
Right. Well, and again, it starts with the database. Back in the day, we had our SQL, we still have our SQL servers and, et cetera. So you've got to have the data, if you think about technology as three levels, right? I think about it from the non-technologist viewpoint of there's the UI, which we interact with. And Excel was a brilliant example of a brilliant UI. And one of my companies back in the day, we were moving folks from using Excel into automating and creating software for them. And we wanted to replicate the UI of Excel because that's what they were, familiar with. Most people are not, don't welcome change, particularly in their work process. So you've got the UI, which we can all appreciate, is how we work with the information, create reports, can, custom, et cetera. You've got a logic layer where a lot of the computation is done, where sort of the heavy lifting, and then you've got the database. So there's three levels. And so when I look at blockchain, I say that's the foundational level. And now we're building collectively as an ecosystem globally, we're building the middle layers of where the heavy lifting is done, the computation, et cetera, where the algorithms will live, if you will, layering on top of the data. And then the UIs. And one of the criticisms of this ecosystem is we haven't had that Netscape moment. We haven't created the UI, which is so friendly and really enables non-technical people to embrace an application and get great utility from it, whatever it is they're seeking, whether it's a game or movement of value or information. And so it just takes time. And everyone's in a rush and everyone is looking at the crypto assets, and that's a distraction in many ways. It's an essential component. But when I think about the use of blockchain and where it's being used today in supply chains, it's bringing visibility and accountability in real time in ways that old databases couldn't do, right? And so there's so many illustrations of what's actually in use today. And one of them is, think about, I've talked about this for years, where we're going in terms of organic food. And how do we know, you and I go into a Whole Foods in the New York area, how do we know that that apple is really organic? Trust, right? So this is an example of how do we lessen our trust that we have to have, and maybe from the standpoint of the apple pickers who are taking the apples off the trees in the state of Washington. If we're all in the supply chain using the same database, then when those apples are coming off, they're being marked, they're being entered into the database right from the beginning of the process. Then they're being transported. And so there's a provenance to the whole process, from the apple picking from you and I buying an apple in the Whole Foods. And we have a trust and a confidence that heretofore we really don't have, that that's actually organic. People have said to me, people are at work developing devices that'll plug into our smartphones. You'll be able to point at an apple and it'll be able to tell you if it's organic. So technology is advancing to give us more trust, more confidence in ways that we've granted to others. Right.
And maybe even
you talked about custody.
And maybe even to be able to track, say, a problem. If if there's a salmonella outbreak, I can now go back and find exactly where this came from quickly, instead of trying to anecdotally piece this together.
Right. And that's exactly right. And then if you think about what I like to talk to people about is, if you layer in, so you've got the database being able to track in real time in a secure way with great confidence, with all the relevant players can see everyone's doing their part. Think about then the digital payment rail that goes alongside of this. So what excites me and some of the companies I've worked with relative to payments, especially with small companies who heretofore have unfortunately had to rely too often on factoring.
Okay.
And if people understand what factoring is, you're basically selling your invoice. So the example is, the great news is you and I have a company, we make a product, and Walmart says, we'll buy it, Mordy and Kevin. Okay. The problem is
90 days, right, before we see our money.
Well, they don't pay for 90 or 120 days, but you and I have to somehow get the capital to make the product. We have to, pay our employees. Right. And so you have this disconnect, which historically, for thousands of years, basically, people have had to borrow against their invoices. And so, well, what if, let's go back to the example I gave you about apples. Well, what if you and I are the apple pickers? Everybody in the chain can see that we did our job, and the apples are gone from the farm. Well, why do we have to wait 90 or 120 days to be paid? So if we have digital payment rails and we can be paid right away, what does that do for the velocity of money? What does it do, let alone for our little small business? And if that means we don't have to sell our invoice for 90 or 95 cents on the dollar, what does that mean for our business? So this is where, to me, a real use case can make a big difference with small businesses, as well as ultimately trust of the consumer at the end. It's already being used relative to trying to prevent conflict diamonds being sold in a jewelry store. So great fear about conflict diamonds. There's a company that's been doing that for years. So there's many other use cases that are being developed that are being used in real time. Listen, one area is, let's say, real estate, right? There's so many inefficiencies in real estate acquisitions and sales. And what if I'm looking to buy a home, I don't have to do title insurance because the ownership is not in question. It's on a database which can be accessed by the relevant parties, shared. It's secure. It's you can trust it. So we don't have to worry if I'm buying a home from Mordy, if Mordy really owns it, or if there's a lien on the property. So that's where blockchain can enable efficiencies in real estate. Now, one of the challenges globally is going back to who is establishing right from the beginning and putting it on a database, who really owns it. It's one thing if you build a new house and say, okay, we can start with blockchain there, but in a lot of parts of the world, ownership is still maybe not as certain,
sophisticated either.
in spite of what the documents show. So those are just examples. There are many more. But I just think that we're still just scratching the surface of where we're going. That the blockchain will enable the crypto assets. I don't know what most of these should be worth. Again, sentiment index. I suspect, like every other technology evolution, we certainly saw with the internet and e-commerce, just because you build it doesn't mean they'll show up, right? In the internet boom, it's like build it and they'll come. Well, the problem was for a lot of startups, they didn't come. Right. And so you still, I believe, have to create and deliver value for which people will pay for.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of these efforts in this ecosystem are going to find out that they're actually not creating something that people will pay for, or is more need to have than nice to have.
It sounds like you're old school in that way. I agree with you, by the way.
I don't think we've suspended economics. I don't think we're going to eternally avoid another recession in the U.S. I just think that times change, technology change, measures change. And so coming back to what we were talking about earlier with people is how do we evolve individually with these changes? If you believe, as I have always believed, that the only constant is change, as many people accept, how do you evolve with the change relative to your ecosystem, relative to your industry, relative to your business, maybe your community? And in the end of the day, business, to me, has always been about fulfilling needs. We all have needs. And I used to say in leading a lot of the businesses I've led and talking to prospective clients, if I asked the question, there was very few people who wouldn't tell me what they needed. Mm-hmm. But I had to ask the question and listen to them and try to understand their needs and then find out if what my company and I was doing was relevant and could deliver the value.
I was sitting last night with a colleague at a restaurant. And it's a brand new restaurant, and it was really successful, clearly, because the place was packed, and even people with reservations were waiting quite a while before being seated. Manager comes over as we're finishing our meal and said, how is the chef? Because it's one of those hibachi places where the guy was, cooking in front of you, which is always like, it's a good fun. And he asked how the chef was, and we said, he was good. I think he cooked the food fine. I think he did, a nice job. The entertainment was relatively standard. What was fascinating to me was we weren't overly exuberant in our praise, but he was clearly looking for praise rather than looking into how to improve, that was just an interesting observation. And I'll contrast that with a different, and you said that you were in hospitality. We had a similar experience. I was out with a client probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and there was a problem with the food. And the assistant manager came up and said, well, I have 2 ways that I can remedy this for you, but either way, I'm going to comp you a dessert. Solution: identifying the problem, developing the solution, helping people, feel felt, as opposed to just looking for a pat on the head. I thought that was just fascinating. Just two different experiences on that front.
Listen, what you're alluding to, which I think is fundamental to building businesses, and I think about leadership, management, and communication, and sort of, leadership is setting out the vision, guiding, inspiring, et cetera. Management is more the tactical, and then communication, which is essential and better direct than passive, is all I'll say. But a core of all of that is listening and is being sensitive, but evidencing that you actually care about people. So in that situation, that if the manager is going over to, if he really cares about you as individuals, not just as customers, and I hope repeat customers, he's listening. He's not coming with a preconceived idea, notion. I think it's been the challenge for many salespeople across our economy or businesses, where they're trying to pitch a product, a service, a solution, with the assumption that whoever they're speaking to needs it. And my disposition natively was always to be a counselor or consultative salesperson. Because again, I'm interested in learning about you. What are your needs? And is what I represent relevant? So I can use this in any context, but in a restaurant context, hey, you and your friends, family went in to have a meal. That was your need, and they were fulfilling that need. The question is, on multiple levels, did you find it a good experience? Would you come back? And in this day and age with technology and social media, even more importantly, what would you say about it online or in a review?
Yeah.
So, that's where it's even harder to deliver a good experience across business, because there's so many more data points. There's so many, everyone's a reporter with their phone, right? So whether it's video or photograph or text, so nothing gets easier about delivering a good experience. The question is, how do you evolve? And when it comes back to that person and their staff, I've always found in business that in my leadership positions, my management positions, is that it started with, did I evidence to those I was working with that I cared about them as people? That's what I always found resonated with me, and I think resonates with the people I work with, is they're individuals. I care about them as people. And if good leaders, good managers position people to be successful, they're cognizant of how to do that with that person, their skill set, their experience, how to challenge them, how to give them enough room to be independent, make decisions, step in when they need to. And I joke with some of my friends, there's some certain parallels between raising a child and managing an employee. But I do think it still resonates with people if they feel that the people around them, and certainly those they work for, care about them as people.
Yeah, it's the old adage about people don't remember what you said, but they certainly remember how you made them feel.
And it couldn't be more accurate in my life, because I lived 28 years in Manhattan. I have more a visual memory than a name memory. If I don't repeat someone's name, it's gone. And I will tell you, there were times I walked down a street in New York, I saw someone that I know I had met. It could have been 10, 15 years before, and I had a reaction. Mm-hmm. And that reaction was, I had no idea what we spoke about. I probably didn't even remember where I met them, if it was only once, but I recognized them. And that reaction was ingrained, and it either led me to look at them and smile and say hello, or keep looking straight ahead and go right by them. And so it's very, very true in terms of that expression. Maya Angelou, whoever, should get proper credit for it. But people do remember how you made them feel. And also, if you leave a good impression on people, you treat them with respect, even if they leave your company, let's say an employee, then you never know down the road where they may come back around and help you. And I've had that in my career. 10, 15 years later, something I was doing became relevant to somebody I used to work with. And I reached out to them, and fortunately they helped me because, I treated them properly. They remembered I was, hopefully respectful and honorable. So all of this, if you look at your career as a long path, how you treat people, how you leave them feeling, the way you conduct yourself, your integrity, your reputation. We used to say on the trading floor through the 90s, you can lose a fortune 10 times, but you can't lose your reputation once.
Mm.
And that was ingrained in me from my parents and my upbringing, but it was something that was reminded of people that be careful. Be careful what you do, because if you're going to live a long life, how it comes back around, it may help you or hurt you.
Yeah, and there's no question that treating people properly is incredibly important. What part of my own journey on the subject is meeting people where they want to be met. It's not where I want to meet them, but as you had said before, I think very astutely, that it's about asking the questions. And what I may think is a need for you may not be a need. And what I think is not a need may be very much so a need. I was having a conversation with somebody recently where I acknowledged that they had a difficult task at hand. And that clearly resonated. And I was humbled.
Yeah, and I would say to you, it reminds me, I've said to people, I was very blessed to go to one of the top business schools in the world in Kellogg. And I will tell you that the top business schools, in my opinion, continue to struggle, and we're reminded of this, unfortunately too frequently, in teaching leadership. They can't teach ethics. Work ethic, they can't teach.
Yeah.
So they're brilliant in what they can do, but what they can't do is sobering. And so much of what I think enables people to be successful in their business careers is what we increasingly have referred to as EQ.
Yeah.
There's a lot of book smart people. There's a lot of people that can create code or manage risk. But how do you, the people that tend to rise up in organizations are able to combine the IQ with the EQ.
Yeah.
And the EQ is not so readily teachable.
Yeah, years ago I worked at a summer camp, and they were very big on leadership, and their entire focus was on leadership by example. That all of leadership was led by example. I think this kind of goes back to a couple of points that you made in a couple of different contexts. One was that helping people at your organization, whether they're employees or colleagues, they're going to model your behavior. And that's certainly true for parents. And I think that's true for employees as well. And perhaps, and again, I wonder what your thoughts are on the subject, perhaps that's why the business schools are having such a hard time with this. Because it's not academic, it's behavioral. You either learn this at home or you learn this somewhere else. And perhaps, once again, I'll suggest, you said your background started off in hospitality.
Right.
Those have been my best employees, by the way. The people who worked as a barista in Starbucks, the person who knew how to field complaints by somebody who worked at some other company, and now they understand customer service because they hear people.
Right. And customer service continues to be the differentiator for any business. And those who understand it and understand how to deploy it are always advantaged. It's a competitive advantage, just like common sense is a competitive advantage because it's uncommon.
It's so funny. I love it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, but it's so true. And what does it take to deliver good customer service? Well, if I go back 25 years ago to the advent, and I was involved in the e-commerce and the internet, et cetera, it's like a lot of the e-commerce sites would bury their phone number if they even provided one.
True.
They were totally insensitive to how people were conditioned to seek help, right? And so I used to joke with student groups I'd speak to is that, everything still comes back to people. And I would joke with them, if you have a problem with your software, you don't call the software.
It's a great line.
So
that's a great line. I'm going to steal that.
But please steal it. But the reality is it still comes back to people and how we interact and how we treat each other and how do we enable a better experience. So to me, the technology side of what my wife and I work on, blockchain, is already at work enabling a better experience in many ways by any definition. But it still comes back to people. And so I work with people in this ecosystem that are trying to enable new or better experiences. And that's all business is, right? It comes back to needs, right? We have needs to do certain things and we want to do it more efficiently, better, cheaper, faster, less risk. Nothing new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of what's going on here is not new under the sun. And counter to what a lot of people think. We're changing how we do things, technology is enabling, et cetera. But so much, again, comes back to people and understanding people. And maybe my major in college should have been psychology, instead of political science. Mm-hmm. Because again, technology is an enhancement. It's a supplement. Yes, it can replace in certain ways, but people are still essential. So whether you're running a restaurant or you're building a technology company or you're, whatever it is, it's still about people. And if you think it's not, you're not ultimately probably going to be as successful. So the smarter companies don't make it impossible to get to somebody when you need customer help. We all are frustrated to the nth degree when we want to talk to our bank, our broker, whomever. It could be a restaurant where they do everything possible to prevent you from getting to a person. And you spend, telecom companies are famous for this, right? You spend hours and hours, you can spend hours on a phone and you get disconnected before you actually get to a person who can answer a question. I'll also tell you that I'm old school. I joke about the use of my mobile phone that I speak with people on it.
Mm.
Weird. I'm strange. I'm old school.
Do you also leave voicemails?
Right. I leave voicemails and I actually call people without making a plan in advance to speak at a certain time. Right. And so I believe there's things that I can achieve faster, better with voice than with a text.
Yeah.
And I make the assumption in the people that know me that, hey, if you're busy, so you don't answer.
Yeah.
You don't pick it up to say, why are you bothering me? Right. So I believe in blending the old with the new, and the constant theme through our conversation about technology is how do you leverage it optimally? But also, sure, there are people I know that don't welcome a call from me, so of course I won't call them, right? I listen.
Yeah.
I listen, right? The old saying in sales was you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them proportionally.
The second person who's mentioned that in 2 days. Hopefully I listened. So
No, very, very much so. And I think, again, we're hitting on some themes to me that as I thought about our conversation, have been consistent across my career. And what I think I've seen as I watch, I learn from others, as I try to relay my learnings, as I try to be a better version of myself tomorrow, next week than I am today. When we go into an early stage company or a more mature company, how does the company or the restaurant or whatever business become a better version of itself relative to its market segment and who it's trying to serve? And that comes back to marketing 101. Hopefully we learn properly segment, target, and position. And how are we positioning our offering, whether it's our personal franchise or it's a company and a service we're providing, to the right, to the right part or target within a segment, since we can't typically be all things to everyone, and we know what that leads to.
Wow, this has been an absolute delight, Kevin. I think we could probably go on for at least a couple more hours on a bunch more topics, and I really feel badly that we didn't get to dig in a little bit more on, the interaction between AI and the blockchain, because I think there's a lot more that we can discuss there. But on that note, if some of our listeners want to reach out to you, how should they best do that?
Sure. Thank you for asking. My wife and I have a website, Key Global Advisors. It's KEE globaladvisors.com, where we have a modest presence. We're not necessarily overt marketers of ourselves, but our website there. My business email is kevin@keyglobaladvisors.com. And I certainly have a presence on LinkedIn where people can reach out to me. But if anything has resonated in our conversation with those who are listening and end up listening, happy to have a follow-up conversation. I hope that we've provided some information of value, depending on who they are. I applaud you for taking this step to launch Ventures and Visionaries. I have no doubt based on your conversations with prior guests, how much you're learning, and I trust your audience is learning. And I hope I've simply contributed to that today.
Kevin, you most certainly did. And the learning process, as we talked about earlier today, is a lifelong journey. It's, you learn so much from every interaction, but being able to truly dive into topics has really been a blessing for me. And I'm ever grateful that you agreed to join us on the podcast. And I want to thank you for sharing some of your thoughts, wisdoms, lessons, and ideas. Hopefully one or two people, or maybe even more, would benefit from our conversation today. I know I certainly did. So thank you. And just in a word for wrap up, that Ventures of Visionaries is sponsored by KJ Technology. As I mentioned before, KJ Technology provides advisory and cybersecurity proactive services for clients. If you have any questions, please reach out by an email to info@kjtechnology.com. Thank you, everybody, and I wish you a fabulous day.
Thank you, Mordy.
Thank you, Kevin. This was really great.